Well, I went out for a walk, and as I often did, and to my surprise, I saw a crowd of about 75 to 100 men gathered round by the main square. 4 men, 2 to each side, stood on opposite ends of a long wooden table. There were 20 cups in total, with only one remaining on the rightmost side. One man on the opposite side from the remaining cup gave out a mighty bellow and lobbed a cork ball which landed in the final cup. The feeling in the town afterward could only be described as elation. Raucous cheers reverberated throughout the town, and a great party erupted.
Mark Twain, 1887.
Of all the things mankind has ever created, I think beer pong is the most beautiful.
It is played everywhere, from rural pastures to urban apartments. It is played by everyone, from kindergartners to elderly retirees. In your wealthier friend's finished basement with water while in middle school, and then in that same basement years later on a hometown Thanksgiving break with beer. Beer pong is the universal game.
Beer pong is America's national pastime. Whenever I lob that ball into those cups, I feel patriotic. In 2,000 years from now, America's only going to be known for 3 things: Constitution, jazz music, and beer pong.
Yet, it is a flawed game, one where women couldn't compete for decades, and people of color even longer. It is a haunted game where every player is measured against the ghosts of the past. It is a game of heroes, of triumph, of spectacular highs, and still more spectacular lows. Cooperstown, New York, August 1839. In the twilight of a summer's day, a group of schoolboys led by a fellow named Kenneth Beer Pong McGraw gathered in the courtyard of the village. A local bar hadn't cleaned up the cups from their dinner service. Beer Pong McGraw took 20 partially filled cups and lined them up on one table.
Of course, back in those days, the table was wooden and the ball was made of cork, so it didn't bounce nearly as much. But man, 20 cups, you gotta wonder what Kenneth Beer Pong McGaw was thinking when he thought of that number. 20 cups, just enough that the game doesn't go on too long or too short. I mean, 20 really is a magic number.
Oh, what I love about beer pong is there's no clock. You're not out of it until you're out of it. You can keep sinking cups until next week if your arm is good enough.
By 1880, the game that had taken Beer Pong McGraw's name had spread all across the country.
It was noon and all the kids had run out of the schoolhouse and into the yard. I went to corral them, to bring them back to their studies. But to my shock, they were all engrossed in something far more simple. 10 cups on each side, throwing balls into them, cheering. The kids say they want to be ball players rather than pastors these days. I pray for the next generation. 1883, Mary Beth Mulroney, school teacher.
Beer pong was beginning to be played professionally. Dedicated leagues sprouted up all around the country. They were lawyers, carpenters, newspapermen, factory workers. They played beer pong half the year and received a salary for it. A man named Johannes Keg formed the first associated league of professional players, entitled the Greek League. But some groups were still left out of America's pastime.
Of course, back in those days, there was intense discrimination against women and minorities. And today, there is still obstacles that both groups must face. The sport is still dominated by white men with IQs under 80.
Octavia Lager was born in 1868 and had dreams of becoming a professional Pong player. She joined the Cincinnati Alpha Kappa Betas in 1891, becoming the first woman to ever play in the major leagues. Unfortunately, her career was short-lived due to opposition from fellow players and the fans.
I saw the most peculiar and offensive thing the other day. There's a new ball player for Cincinnati, Octavia Lager. She hurls the ball with a manly intensity only possible for someone who is thoroughly unladylike. Grover Cleveland is president. She should have some more sense than to find a husband rather than hobnob with men. Zachary Clemens, sports writer, 1893.
Lager would be forced out of the league in 1894 and would never play again. Her struggles were in line with some of the greatest athletes at the time who were excluded due to the stranglehold the white-dominated Greek league had on professional beer pong.
What people don't realize is that beer pong was an integral part of first and second wave feminism, and in fact was also a major part of the civil rights movement. Beer pong's gender barrier was broken the same year that women gained the right to vote. And what some people might not realize is that beer pong was desegregated just 20 years prior to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s March on Washington. And might I add, Dr. King was a mighty fine ponger.
The latter half of the 1900s saw the sport again explode in popularity. There were new heroes: Jeff the Drunk, the star player of the New York Vomets; Susie Sloshed of the Colorado Ralphies; Anson Absinthe of the Arizona Diamond Yaks.
It looks so simple, but it really isn't. There's so many different ways and shapes to play, but anyone can play it. Anyone can play it. Beer pong is second only to death as the great equalizer in our society.
The future is, as of yet, unwritten. Men continue to mansplain the sport to their girlfriends. Tables continue to be dominated by hubris and ego. But, by God, the sport, however flawed, still retains the beauty so created by Kenneth Beer Pong McGraw all those years ago. 20 cups, 2 balls, and, by God, a dream.